Hello, everyone, and welcome to the midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the Education Assistant here at the Arboretum, and today we are in our Associate Director Arlene's office because it is cold and rainy outside, but that is okay. We have a garden conversation for you today. We've got two special guests. We've got Annabel Renwick, who is the Curator of the Blomquist Native Plant Garden over at Sarah P. Duke Gardens, and we've got Maegan Luckett, who is the Horticulturist at that garden. And of course, we've got Paige, our Director of Horticulture, who is going to be leading us through a conversation with them. We're going to be talking about all kinds of wonderful stuff. We're going to be talking about Piedmont Prairies. We're going to be talking about native plants. We're going to be talking about women in horticulture, too. It's just going to be a wonderful conversation. Those of you watching this on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with our announcements out of the way, I think I can pass things over to Greg to lead us through a wonderful conversation with Maegan and Annabel.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all, for tuning in. This is another iteration of my very evil plan to introduce you to friends and colleagues in this great public horticulture community that we have here in the Triangle area. And what I want to do, and also as Blake alluded to, this is also our way to kind of kick off and pay homage to Women in History Month. And we're taking a spin on that, doing a Women in Horticulture Month. And we've had a lot of those things over the last couple of weeks, kind of in that theme, and this is an extension of that, and two great folks to represent that. And what I want to do now is let them kind of introduce themselves, talk about how they got into this crazy horticultural field, and then we're going to get into the good stuff and talk about Piedmont Prairies. I've got a really good story about how I met Annabel and started drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, on doing something interesting and creative with kind of no-mo spaces and other things. So I'm going to go to Maegan and ask you, as most people know, I've been doing this for quite a long time. What got you into working in horticulture?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you so much for having Annabel and I.
Always glad to have you two here.
A huge honor to be here and to be interviewed by you. I really appreciate the opportunity. So yes, I'm Maegan Luckett. I've worked with Annabel in the Blomquist at Duke Gardens in the native plant section specifically for just over 5 years. And how I got into public horticulture is sort of a long, circuitous route, frankly. Back when I was just a young lass, I had I think it's funny, so that's probably a good sign. I was interested from a young age in plants, and my grandmother was into gardening, and so I've always sort of had a fascination with nature, kind of tangentially. But when I went to my undergrad, didn't have a whole lot of direction about how I wanted to go, and so I ended up getting a summer job when I was 19 or so in Colorado, which is where I'm from, a college facilities summer gig doing doing just their flower beds. It was part of a flower bed crew, so I didn't get to do the mow, blow, go stuff. I got to actually work in the flower beds, which was pretty nice. Otherwise, I think it would probably have a totally different career path. No offense. Yeah. So anyway, I did that for a summer and really took to it. And so upon moving to Denver from Durango, which is where this experience happened, I thought, maybe I want to continue on in my undergrad in plants somehow. And I thought horticulture, botany, they're the same thing, right? Because the school that I was at the time, the Metropolitan State University of Denver, didn't have horticulture. They had botany. And I was like, it's the same thing, I think. And it was vastly different. Of course, there is a lot of overlap, but it was a very, very different experience than I expected, but I absolutely loved it. And it sort of sent me in a completely different trajectory. I ended up getting to North Carolina, wanting to do graduate school work in ecology or some botanical field specifically. And I thought I would end up in academia. And I ended up instead in biotech first. I was in that field in RTP here for about just shy of 10 years in various technician roles, and did that for a good while. I enjoyed the novelty of a fairly lucrative paycheck, which was something I didn't expect. So did that for a while, and sort of got to the point where I thought, this isn't where I want to spend the rest of my life. And so then I kind of searched around a little bit and kind of decided, I think what I loved in the beginning, even though I definitely loved botany, what I loved in the beginning was horticulture. So how can I get into that? And so again, just sort of through a couple of different career changes. I worked for the city of Raleigh for a little while in their horticulture staff, Elon University briefly, and met a young woman. I don't know if I'm going on too long. I'll cut it short. But in any case, I just made sort of a long circuitous route and wanted to get it into Duke Gardens, and got an internship there, and kind of the rest is history with a lot of good things in life. Timing is everything. And I managed to get into a position when someone else was leaving. And here I am, and it's a wonderful mix of my passions of botany and horticulture to work in the Blomquist. So I couldn't be happier. I absolutely love it. So that's how I got here.
It's funny to hear people say how they kind of got started, because I think we all have very similar stories. I directly point my finger at my grandmother too for every kind of book you could think of about trees or birds or whatever.
Neat.
And she had a big garden, and that kind of got me on that career path. But thank you. That was I'd forgotten about the Colorado connection. Your story is very interesting too.
How much do you want to know?
All of it.
There's not enough time for that. But so where do I start? I'm British. And we moved here to North Carolina in 2008. And so I'm going to try and sort of just briefly do what was my background in the UK and in France and Germany as well, because I've worked there as well. But my background is a little bit of more of an academic research side. I do have I was brought up on a farm, and my whole side of my family, both sides were farmers from hill lands of Northumberland and Durham in the north of into Scotland, sort of that sort of borders. So I was brought up in those sort of areas. And when I went to university, I did agricultural botany, which doesn't seem to exist anymore, but was a good subject. It's a little bit like horticulture, the practical side of it's more the research side of agriculture in a way. So it's plant sciences for agriculture. And I love that sort of hills and those grasslands up there. And in a way, I went on to do a PhD as well after I got my degree in sort of grassland ecology and grassland. I won't go into too much detail, but it was in grasslands really. And but then I was at that particular time in my life when if you didn't have molecular biology on your CV, you couldn't get a job. So I then decided I had to go and do molecular biology somewhere because I couldn't get a job in what I wanted to do. So I managed to do that for a few years, and then I got into industry with that agricultural industry. And I was in agricultural industry, which is today is Syngenta. It used to be ICI then, or Zeneca, when I was there. And then we moved around a few times. I got married a few times. Not married a few times. I've been married once.
Once is enough.
I've been round a few times. I've lived in France. I've lived in California. We're back to the UK again, into France. And then I decided, you know what? I like my research. I enjoy this. I wasn't very political, so I didn't, want to go up the political ladder with that. I decided, you know what, I want to go with my passion, and my passion was gardening. And so I went to the English Garden School in Chelsea and London when we happened to be in the UK for one of our sort of periods where we stayed in one place for a while. And then not long after I got that qualification, I sort of, as a diploma in garden design, I did a little bit of work around London sort of areas, in the home counties as we call them. And then lo and behold, we were moving again, but over to North Carolina with my husband's job. And so I moved here in 2008, as I said, and I started to volunteer in Sarah P. Duke Gardens, because when I looked around, I thought, nobody really gardens here, do they, And when I got to Duke Gardens, I was blown away, I have to say, and I'm still blown away by Duke Gardens. I really am, by the quality and everything we have over there. And I've never left. So I became a horticulturist, the job that Maegan now has in the Native Plant Garden. And then that was in 2012. And in 2018, I became the curator. And then just to make this circuit again, with my research, well, not my research, my background in agriculture with grasslands and things, came full circle when I came to work with the Piedmont Prairie in a way. So that sort of leads on to there.
Yeah.
And here I am. And here we are.
Yeah.
Here we all are.
Here we all are. Yeah. It's funny, having worked in a lot of places myself, I think we're blessed to have a good gardening community here, but
absolutely,
it pales in comparison to what they do in England. But compared to other places I've lived, it's pretty rich here, which is, again, part of why I wanted you guys to be here and why we're doing these sorts of things. But I want to tell how we met and the work that we've done together, and then talk a little bit about pocket prairies and the stuff you guys are doing. And, speaking of being blown away, when I saw that, I forget when I came to see that. It might have been this time last year. I hate to say.
The pocket prairies.
Yeah.
Probably was.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But, and I'm going to give a plug for Duke before I launch into that. It's always been one of my favorite gardens. The stuff you guys are doing there is absolutely amazing. It's just such a great space right in the middle of the campus. But I had gone to an American Public Garden conference, and I'd seen in the very long itinerary, there was a talk on Piedmont Prairies. And prior to coming here, when I was at Bartlett Tree Research Lab, I had 300 acres and a lot of areas that we weren't doing anything with. They were either getting mowed or we would mow them once a year. And I had worked and talked to some people that we networked with that said, you should do something with these. It's nice to, you shouldn't mow them for lots of reasons, but you should do something other than just let them be static and cut them once a year. So I was interested in that and went to your talk. I think it was Stefan. Stefan was there.
Yeah.
And the light bulbs went off. It's like, all right, I'm in the Piedmont of North Carolina. This is exactly what we needed to do. So immediately upon hitting home ground, I'd gotten in touch with Annabel and went up there it was a Duke Alumni Week. My wife is a Duke alum. And spent time with the two of you, walked through it, got the gist of things, fell in love with it and the idea and the process. And met with my wife later on that afternoon. I took her through the garden. We went through the Blomquist. We're standing where the cathedral church part.
Yeah.
Yes, is. And I'm looking and I'm waxing and waning poetic about it. And the things are moving in the wind. And I'm talking about the layers and the insects and the birds. And she patted me on the arm, which is code for. And she says, I know you like it, but it looks like a bunch of weeds to me. So there definitely is that mentality about it. But once you know about it and the different layers and levers and how to maintain it, it has a whole lot more relevance than just a static, undiverse, grassy pasture. So with reckless abandon, with help from Annabel and our friend Angie from North Creek, we got a pallet of plants, and I put in 4 big sections of Piedmont Prairie. And I think they've continued. I don't think they put in a section last year. But it became this diverse, really incredible piece of the property that for an arboretum, it was kind of outshining a lot of things there. And it really kind of opened up a whole new door of horticulture and plants for me on how to maintain some of those spaces that are static and you don't really do anything with. Not everybody has 400 acres though. So I want to ask you both a little bit about the pocket prairie side of things. So, and that ties in directly with what Preston's going to talk about tomorrow, is taking that big picture idea with that palette of plants and the same kind of idea. There's no such thing as a no maintenance or low maintenance landscape. There are derivatives of that, but this is about as close as you can get. So talk to me a little bit about what you've done with the pocket prairies. How did that get started, and where are you guys going with that now?
Well, I'll start off regarding that, because really the pocket prairies were totally a spin-off from the prairie itself, and Maegan will talk about the pocket prairies specifically. So, Greg's right about the aesthetic of what we classify at the moment or call these Piedmont prairies. And I like to call them grassland ecosystems. So they're the southeast, and I'm not the expert on this. There's more experts than myself on these southeastern grassland ecosystems. But this sort of landscape was around, here before the colonists came, before the settlers came from Europe. It was a landscape that was more adapted to these environmental conditions. And I think the way Stephen Bloodworth, who was my boss at the time when I was horticulturist, he was the curator, and I were looking at this was more of an ecosystem in a way. It was more looking at it as an ecosystem for wildlife. We also were thinking of an educational component to sort of show people who came to the gardens what was the landscape like, what was here before these more, okay, I wouldn't say just European, because we do have Asiatic gardens there, but not sort of American, what was here in American. And you've got the plants here are so amazing, because we use a lot of the plants that you have as natives, but over in Europe, and not just Europe, in Australia and everywhere else in the world, we use as exotics, if you want to look at it like it. We use them as our gardening horticultural plants. And they're well known to everybody. In fact, a lot of them have been cultivated and bred in Europe and come back here as cultivars. So for us, it was more like trying to sort of get people to think about a sense of place, what was here. Not necessarily for us to convert everybody else to do this, but we got a real shock after we put it in. I mean, Greg was one, but we had many people coming over and over again asking us, how can we put these Piedmont prairies into different landscapes? And, we still do get it. And I'll give you stories. Like one person came to, in the landscape architects mostly, and they said, we want to put a Piedmont prairie in front of this hospital at Duke, somewhere in the region. And I'm saying, well, you don't really want to put a Piedmont prairie in front of the hospital at Duke. Oh, yes, we do. This is what we want. And when they come to see it, they go, ooh. Whoa.
Or governmental building shade.
We're not sure that this is what we want. And now that we've got the pocket prairies to show people, and again, Maegan will go into more detail, we take them over to the pocket prairies. And I think they're a little happy with those. But just to go back to the Piedmont prairie in a way, that sort of landscape for me is something, if you have land. Again, I was thinking of, Stefan and I used to travel down and look at various places. And we would say, if you had land 5 acres plus, around here, people have lots of big properties, not so in the UK. And you could fill up some of your landscapes with this type of planting. And it could be a wildlife habitat extraordinaire. It really could be. And we thought about corporate campuses and things like that, where you have maybe 50 acres, 30 acres, 10 acres, 5 acres, 2 acres. Could you actually cover this land? It's at the back, no, it's not up in people's faces, but it's sitting there as a wildlife habitat. And you have lots of these matrix of this. You have these corridors. This is what we were trying to achieve with the prairie. To be honest, that was our goal. Trying to get people to grow this in their backyard, not in their backyards, but in their
back acres.
Back acres.
Right.
And if they could do that, then there comes the issue of management, burning. Do you burn? Do you mow? We don't have the animals here anymore to graze. But how do we manage it? And that's something that we're still doing now. But I would like to pass this over to Maegan, really, to talk about pocket prairies, because there were so many people that said, this is just too unruly. And that's when we decided, just as Maegan was about to start, actually, in 2018, we decided, let's do some selection of the plants. We got some space over at the hospital at Duke in their medians, and let's start there. And I'll pass the story over to Maegan to continue with that.
So this was, I think we put in the original iteration in, was it 2019? Yeah. And so Annabel she's really developed sort of the original plant palette based on what had worked well in the prairie, what would not get so overbearing and huge, would be applicable and reasonable to be in a space like a parking lot median. So the sort of stage was set back in 2019. The soil was essentially unamended. We just removed the grass that was there. And basically we kind of just tried, it's sticking to me, just tried basically a proof of concept to see whether or not, because there was this interest in this kind of landscape writ large, how could we sort of put it on a micro-urban scale potentially? And so I think we had about 15, 20 different species, things that folks would know, echinacea, for instance, penstemons, beard tongues and that sort of thing. And so it was basically a proof of concept to see whether or not these plants, we knew they would work in a prairie setting, would they work in a median? And that first year, it was amazing to see how quickly these things took off. I mean, I think planted them in July. I mean, in the hottest part of the year, we watered them like twice and they just took off. So that first year, we just kind of, again, proof of concept. And then we expanded on that in 2020 during COVID and started to kind of work in different design sort of processes, kind of trying to see, how to make this a bit more readable. Now we know that this will work here. How can we maybe make it applicable so that a facilities manager would maybe want to put it in like some median in front of their business or, that sort of thing. And again, it worked out really well. We got a lot of interest from various groups. We got a lot of interest from birds and bees. And so all in all, I think it was a very, very, very successful experience. And so now we're, like 5-6 years in, and now it's just sort of seeing how these ecosystems are starting to evolve. And it is sort of like prairie where you have a lot of dynamics, more so than you would maybe expect. But
the plants move around.
But the plants do move around. Mm-hmm. Some outcompete others. And then you find the most random plants just kind of popping up for, I don't know how familiar you are with Spigelia out there. It's woodland pink, or Indian pink, I think. I found one just randomly popped up in the middle of the parking lot last year. I mean, it's like something that likes the shade and it seems to be doing well. So it's just sort of random how things happen. So it is still a dynamic system, but I think maintenance is still the $1 million question. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's been sort of the challenge to because initially we thought, can we sort of sell this idea as a lower maintenance alternative to just kind of a crabgrass, median. And so I think that there's a lot of benefits to it, but it is certainly not maintenance free. No. It's especially because we have cars parking on either side of it. We had to create a 1-foot buffer on either side of the planting to allow the cars to, have the space to park. And so that is surface area for weeds. But I think that all in all, it has been successful, and it's been, an ongoing learning process. And from that, there's been continued we've been kind of using the medians as our, I guess, lab, as it were. And I've done some experimenting with timing of different warm season grasses for medians, and then trying to put different size. The next year I tried to get some plants from Angie at North Creek, mm-hmm. Love them, these would be herbaceous perennials that are cultivars, even because we wanted to see can cultivars also work in this, because the initial plants were all straight species primarily. So can these cultivars also work in this setting? And I mean, again, these natives have done fantastic. We also wanted to see, could they outcompete the weeds? Could that be a management technique? And we found some interesting things there. And then this year, I'm hoping to do some seeding work, because we do everything from plugs. And a lot of people, especially when they're doing large broadcasting, they're interested in how this prairie is great, but how do you do it from seed? And so we don't have a lot of experience, or really any experience with that. So I'm hoping to do that this year, and we'll see how it goes, and on and on and on until we run out of parking lot space, I guess.
That's an interesting aspect of it. Then probably the question that I got the most from people is establishing it, is planting it. And, all the stuff that you did and told me to do, and the stuff that I talked to the folks at North Creek about, we did plugs, landscape plugs, and it was kind of a new concept. More people are doing them now, but you basically get a plant with a really good root system. And these are tough species of plants. And you told me that, plant them and stand back. And it was amazing how quickly things established, and you talked about that too. That was a big surprise for me to actually see how quickly things established. Planted in June and July, we were soaking wet planting them because it was so incredibly hot, and we had no losses of anything. Get things established with water, hoping to outcompete weeds and things like that. But to watch that establish, and also what you said about things kind of spreading, there are certain species that are going to be roguish. Solidago went kind of rampant in some places. Rebecca that we planted, I knew that was going to go crazy. That took things over, but you kind of need to bend with that and let those things happen. So that was an interesting aspect. But people always ask, why didn't you just seed that? And the most logical explanation that I give people is, we're not tilling up that soil and planting these things because there is a weed bed that's in there, and you don't want to expose the soil to things coming in. We are literally shoehorning these plants in this horrible soil and getting some water on them and standing back. There aren't irrigation systems where you're doing these pocket prairies. You didn't have irrigation in your prairie. We didn't in ours. We had water to get things established, and then it gets moved and turned off. So broadcasting seed is difficult. And I don't think that if you want a good success rate, I always tell people plugs is the way to do it. But I'm curious to see what kinds of things you get from that. And I want to say, talking about the maintenance of it, and that's a good thing to get some opinions from both of you. A traditional prairie is browsed by animals, buffalo. Last time I checked, we don't have buffalo. We didn't in Charlotte. I don't think we do in this part of the world. Burning is another way, and I know that y'all used to burn yours. What I found with the burning, we had some dam areas that we had planted with perennials and grasses that we would burn. And I think that just made the blackberry come back quicker. It would burn so fast and so hot it wouldn't kill the fire ant mounds, but we never got the weeds under control. And it was precarious to do that. I was outside of Charlotte in a 300-acre bubble. You guys are in the middle of Duke University trying to set something on fire. I know that was a hard thing to organize and manage. And what we ended up doing eventually was just we would mow. And that seemed to do a good job. But talk a little bit about how you maintain the Blomquist. And I know you did fire, but you've gone away from that. I think you last told me, unless you come back.
New story, but I because you just burned it last week.
Oh, cool!
Just to let you know. But yeah, so we put it in 2015 as plugs, well as plants actually, more than just 2-inch plugs. There's more 3.5-inch plants. 20,000 of them is what we put in. And again, I appreciate people can't do that in reality,
Yes.
in a lot of places.
Have a cadre of
They're
volunteers.
not a botanical
Right.
garden. And I also think if you're going to do this, you have to think, what is your goal? What are you trying to get out of this? We're sort of a botanical garden. We're trying to achieve, we have thousands of people coming through, show them botanical diversity and stuff like that. So we have a very different goal than if I was somebody with my own farm, had a backyard, and I'd probably be very happy with lots of solidago and ironweed, actually. It would look very pretty and some big blue stem. And that would be great. But where we are, our goal is different. We have to obtain diversity. And when I went out, I collected the seeds initially, so they were all local ecotypes within like 50, 60 miles of here. And we collected well over 100 different species. And I designed it initially, which is very foolish of me to say that now, because my scientific brain said, I'm going to put this out, and every year I'm going to go in and see how these plants move around.
Well, didn't you also design it based on these like micro hillocks and just
I did. I designed it on shape and thought, well, this plant, like you say, this one spreads by, just flops over and makes a mound of seed here. Because you could see it when you went out to look at, collecting it. You could see it in these remnant prairies and think, how do these plants grow? What was the ecology of the seed ecology? A lot of effort went into that, and in the end of the day, it was like, whoa, the plants are going to do what they're going to do, and they're just going to flow where they want to flow. But it is very dependent on management. And again, that harks back to my work on botanical analysis and looking at grazing management with sheep and cattle, burning as well, mowing. That really does impact your botanical community. So initially we said, right, you listen to what everybody says. We're going to burn once a year, or we're going to mow once a year, which is going to be the end of winter, which is like sort of February-ish into March. And by doing that, after a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, we ended up with my husband got up one day and he looked around and he said, you've got a monoculture here. And it wasn't quite a monoculture, but it was like 3 or 4 different plants and totally dominated. And we'd planted originally 70% grasses, and I couldn't even see any grasses. It was all ironweed, it was solidago, it was goldenrod, rudbeckia, blackberry, okay? And so then my old brain went into action, thinking about what did we used to do to this. We said, right, what I haven't got here is I haven't got the animals. I haven't got the cattle, I haven't got the sheep, I haven't got the bison, I haven't got these different grazing patterns. I'm going to bore you now, but animals graze differently. Cattle graze higher because they sort of wrap their tongue around the vegetation and chew it off, while sheep nibble way down to the ground. And also horses tug things out, of the ground. And you're a goat person. You kept goats graze differently too. So all that different behavior of grazing makes a very diverse habitat. But if you're just going in and you're going in with your mower and you're mowing it if it's a lawn, believe me, you'll end up with everything looking very similar. So what we started doing, was it 2 or 3 years ago? It was during COVID again, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I said, right, I'm going to go in. After the mowing back late February, early March, I went back in again about May. And I cut it. And by May, it was already up to my knees. And I cut it down to about 6 inches. Just went straight through the whole thing, cut it all down. Mainly because things like the grasses, warm season grasses, they don't really kick off until the soil's around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. 60 Fahrenheit, am I right? Temperature here? Not centigrade, Fahrenheit. It needs to be warmed up, and that gets into May. And I could see the little grasses there, but they never could compete against the ironweed, which was sitting there over winter and out-competing everything. So by cutting everything back, then it allowed the light in, and more plants were able to get light. Therefore, you had more plants growing. I went back again a month later, I think it was again in June. I went in and did a selective cut. And that prairie that year, the prairie that we had, was the most diverse I'd seen since the first or second of 2 years because of those different cuttings. Yeah. And I've just done that more now. And those of you who've heard of the Chelsea chop, and you hear the Chelsea chop, like you cut it back around May time, a lot of that is geared towards these plants, actually. All these grazing plants. These plants are grazed by herbivores. They've evolved to be grazed. So it's great cutting them back. And what you tend to do is you delay the flowering, you obviously keep them shorter, and you delay the flowering. So we were having plants that were flowering in the past, finished flowering in August. They were now going on into November.
And then it'd be a lot shorter and more compact.
And looking much more attractive to the observer. Yeah. So for us, I think that was a success. However, we've just burnt again. And I did say to my boss, you can burn when I leave. That would be the next time. But that has not been the case because we were starting to get a lot of woodies. Really, a lot of woodies into it. Yeah. So we burned just this last couple of weeks, 2 weeks ago, in fact, 2 weeks today. And it was very hard finding a window of dryness recently. Yeah. And in fact, the ground was still wet, so it wasn't a hot burn. But we did burn. And that's how we're managing it at the moment, is mostly through cutting at different times. And then I think it's looking a lot better.
It's going to be interesting to see this year what happens after this burn. Yes. And so,
but managing the pocket prairie is a little different.
Yeah, I can't imagine you're going to burn when there's pickup trucks backed up.
And who knows, maybe their exhaust pipes will start them on fire. So
I imagine that has to be a thing, because they have to back into the the planting beds.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate because the one side in particular is where, because on this side of the parking lot, it's all staff from the hospital, and all told, they tend to be a little bit more cognizant. Whereas on this side, it's where the valet parking for the hospital is, and that just happens to be where they park all their trucks, and they just happen to need to back into it, and it's funny, I'll be over there working and I see the valets like backing up just a little bit. And then if I'm not there when I come to see the pocket prairie, it's like, yeah, I've even seen instances where I think somebody has backed up into it, and who knows what happened there. But yeah, as far as how I maintain the pocket prairies, it's more kind of akin to how folks maintain their herbaceous planting, but instead of doing it, so just kind of cutting things back all wholesale, but instead of doing it, and I used to do it kind of late winter, the way we did with the prairie, so February, just kind of tidy it all up for the oncoming spring. But part of the reason that we're doing this is hopefully for urban pollinators to utilize, not just as sort of a honeypot to get pollen and so forth during the growing season, but also as habitat. And so that I was like, oh yeah, I guess I should probably maintain these, the standing herbaceous material for as long as possible to allow any overwintering bees who might be in the pith of the stems or in the ground, the opportunity to emerge for the spring. So I've started last year really keeping everything up throughout the winter until, I actually am kind of doing it, started last week, cutting stuff back. And also I think that during the winter time, I think personally, because I'm a big fan of grasses, that really is a beautiful time of the year for grasses specifically. There's a lot of winter interest, I think, especially if you're kind of looking down the pocket prairie.
Yeah, the whole span
you can
of it.
I think it's very engaging because it's all sort of concentrated along this sort of linear path, and it's all nicely sort of kept in. So yeah, that's kind of how I do the management. And then, honestly, I do have some volunteers that come in and help with just the weeding. That's just the fact of life, and it's challenging because it is sort of like a hybrid. You can't maintain it the way you can maintain the larger prairies. So you have to maintain it a little bit different. We were hoping that it would just be kind of a one and done thing. You could, wouldn't require much maintenance at all, but that is not really the case. But
even the prairie, the things I did at Bartlett, they required you'd get a rogue whatever that would come up.
Yeah.
And it just, I would, every Monday, I would go up there first thing in the morning and I'd bring a big bucket with me and I'd just walk through and just kind of see what was blooming, look for insects and pull the mare's tail and the stuff that was coming up, or the pokeweed that decided it found a new home and that kind of stuff. And it gave me a chance to kind of zen out and be away from my office and out away from stuff. And also to watch things, watch it moving and what's out competing and what's just a chance to kind of check in.
And to be fair, it's not like I have to. It's still less maintenance than it would be like a traditional, flower bed, because it's I'm not deadheading it all the time.
Or even if it was just grass,
I don't need to make it thing. Yeah, exactly. So it's just basically one cutback a year and then
and I think some of the biggest discussions we have about this is what is the public prepared to accept,
right?
That's a good point.
And Maegan gets quite a lot of positive comments about, well, we do when we get the visitors coming to look at it, but even just the people who park there, just say this is sometimes the best time of the day for them. They just to see that sort of wildlife, just to see the
something
flowers,
just to see especially when it's June, it's the highlight of its blooming season. It is interesting though. I did have what Annabel was alluding to, a woman who is parked. So basically, as I've mentioned before, you've got a parking lot here, you've got a parking lot on the other side, but then we also have a third parking lot that's kind of up a hill. And so I was weeding one day or doing whatever, and this woman was walking up to the parking lot, and she says, "I just want to thank you for whatever, for what you do. This is the best part of my day." And I thought, that is so awesome. And also,
You going home?
really? I mean, I hope you're enjoying your job, your life, or whatever. But so that's great.
Having spent some quality time in the hospital, it's got to be the best part of their
Yeah,
their job.
that is a good point.
Because it's a cavern in there.
Yeah.
And they're getting outside, and and it's not it's a parking lot.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing that struck me when I'd heard you guys talking about it. I finally got a chance to go see it with the two of you, and not just to come over that hill and then to see it and then to get your input on it made it more relevant. But I like the vantage point of standing down and looking at the whole thing and thinking, okay, in this very sterile, static environment, is all this diversity that's going to attract lots of different insects. And, I'm biased because I'm a plant person, but I would rather spend those 25 seconds of my attention parking my car and going somewhere and seeing that and knowing what it's serving.
Yeah.
And the educational side, which you have brought up, that's a great opportunity to inform the general public and for people like me that, now that I'm here and we've got, just shy of 10 acres to play around with, where can I incorporate some pocket prairies and where can I do some things like that to add the diversity, add the opportunity for the wildlife to interact with it, but also for us a chance to have it interpreted and educate our visitors about it, because I think it is an important thing. And it strikes such a chord because and having just moved into a new home and gone through that whole process, people don't have the same size yards and gardens that they used to. And this is another avenue that they can go into to have a garden and bring all those things, nice flowers and the diversity of grasses. And, I'm a winter, spring, summer, fall person, and there's nothing nicer than a group of grasses in the wintertime that add movement, and the color, and the sun is lower in the sky and it shines through them.
Very atmospheric.
It is. So it's a great opportunity, not just from the ecological side of things, but aesthetically.
Yeah.
It checks all those boxes and strikes those chords.
I was going to say, if you go onto the Duke website and you go onto the Blomquist, you hear the bird choral, as it's called. This is a couple of years ago. I walked into the prairie in January. I happened to be on weekend duty, and the noise was amazing, just hearing the birds. I was just blown away by that as well, of just hearing the birds. And I just you can hear me walking along on the gravel. But hearing the sound of those birds, they were just like hidden away amongst the grasses. And this was in middle of January. So if that doesn't make you think this is here for a value, for a reason, nothing else will. And certainly it does, even over in the parking lots, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that first year we planted some milkweed, the Asclepias tuberosa, and within, an incredibly short amount of time, within a month, I think we saw caterpillars, and the chrysalis, and then the caterpillars saw the adults. So we saw all phases that first summer. So already, okay, we're doing the right thing. If it's just for this one caterpillar, we've done the right thing. But we've seen goldfinches on the echinacea over there, and it's just so many different types of bees. I'm currently, actually, though I work at Duke Gardens, I'm an NC State graduate student in the horticulture program, and I'm doing some work. I have to plug for, Wolfpack. Swore I'd never do this in my life, but here I am doing it. So that's the research that I'm doing, and so it's been interesting because I'm working on pollinators and learning all the different bees, and actually beginning to train my eyes to see the diversity of pollinators that are utilizing this space. And so I can only imagine what it's like in the prairie when you've just got it on a 10 by 90 square foot of of parking lot, how much diversity you're seeing. I can only imagine, what it's like in the prairie, and I'm sure I will look at some point. But
That was one of my first take homes when I did the first round of prairies at Bartlett in Charlotte was, as we're staging the plant material, and thank you, I learned from you. I fretted and fretted about doing something and having a design, but I had in my head where I wanted everything, and everybody was standing waiting for me to drop each plug. The next year I didn't do that, but the first year I did that. So as I'm getting stuff and people start planting, just the cacophony of bugs and insects that were on the flats that were up by the road. Mm-hmm. And then once we got things planted and they started to take off, later in the summer when it was up this high, you drive up there and just clouds of goldfinches would fly
so
away
pretty.
as you. So it's so rewarding on so many levels. Any kind of green space and gardening. I mean, I walk through the garden in the morning and the bird song now is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It almost drowns out the train and the traffic and stuff. But it's like it's noticeable. When no one was here yet, just to walk through and hear that stuff. How are we doing on time?
There's about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah. You guys want to do some questions?
Yeah.
Let's do some questions.
Sure. So Marilyn wanted to know, are there any plants that are on the list of those you initially used in the pocket prairie that you wish you hadn't, or that you had to remove, or that just didn't persist?
Not really. I mean, I will say that there has been some jostling,
I don't know if plants do that or not.
with their leaves.
I think they do. I think they do.
Yeah, or their roots. I don't know. Not really. I think that there were a few things that I did a little bit later that added in as kind of sort of secondary attempts or additions that maybe didn't go as well as I wanted. There's the first thing that comes to mind is a world, not tick seed. World Asclepius, it's the little white one that I really, really wanted it to work well. But I think because it was sort of so much further behind because it was put in the next year, I think that along with the other Asclepius just got chewed up by the insects. So that's what it's there for, but I was hoping that would get a little bit bigger. But as far as what I would have not put in, not really, because even the solidagos that we used, the goldenrods, they were all species, the Nemeralis and the, what was the other one? Or Nemorosa. Oh, I can't remember. But anyway, they're
Odora.
Yeah, Odora. Yeah. Thank you. They're smaller and
they're more well behaved.
They're more well behaved. The penstemons are beautiful. They move around. They do well. The only thing I would say, the Rudbeckia is all good.
I was going to say about the design. I think the way we did it the first year was more prairie styled, and it's more forgiving.
Yeah, that's true. It's more forgiving.
While if you have block designs, if something doesn't do well,
it's easier to see. Yeah, that's a good point. So in the second iteration, we did sort of a larger swathe kind of pattern design. With the hope of it being kind of what you'd say more readable at a distance or usable on maybe a larger scale, whereas, as Annabelle suggested, the other ones were a little bit more prairie style, so maybe like a truly pocket prairie. And so that first year, there were a few things that took a while to get up and running, so you did see some kind of blank spots initially, but by the second year, all of that had kind of filled in. The other thing was that this first couple of years, we didn't quite understand the timing for grasses. So all of these other plants that we did, we did in so the first planting we did in July, the second one I think was September. And it had really kind of the window for the best time, or at least in our experience, for putting in the warm season grasses like your little blue stems and andropogon and those sorts of things. They just did not come up well at all that next year, which is why I did that an experiment sort of really dial in that window. So I guess, I don't know if I'm answering your question at all, but no, I wouldn't say that we put in anything that I think was a mistake in terms of it being too aggressive.
Sure, just put it all in, let nature sort it out.
You have to do that with this kind of planting. It was hard for me to let go of that sense of order and planning and the first year we did it, we made this jig so that we could draw lines and crosshatch in the area we wanted to plant, so that we could put our planting holes in nice, neat little lines. And it took me 2 seasons to get away from that, to finally to the point it was like, just
Put them in groups.
just put them in groups. And my crew were just like, right, I know I want this here, and I know this is going to be shorter, so put this where there's a tree. The rest of it, I don't care what you do with it. Have things in groups, and some height in the middle, and just let it run. And it looks so much better for that. I was surprised at how, like the ironweed, how I was so surprised how quickly that took off. But we liked it. The pycnanthemum also, that went bonkers, but covered with bees and wasps and all that stuff. But you have to let go of that sense of order and aesthetics, and it's going to do its own thing and have its own sense of order and aesthetics when it's done.
I think you could say you have your favorites.
Yes.
I know you have your favorites.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it changes too from season to season. I was particularly in love with Eragrostis eliatii for a couple of years, and then I've moved on to that smaller muhly grass, the rose muhly. I think that one was kind of from my grass trial that was I wasn't expecting much from that one, because muhly, whatever, but then it was it was lovely, and I really liked it a lot. So yeah, you get your favorites for sure.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Okay, so Diane wants to know, how about a pocket prairie in the unused area by the JCRA parking lot or elsewhere at the JCRA? Is there enough room, Greg?
There's always enough room, and I've the only thing that's keeping this from happening is time. There's lots of other things that we're trying to get wrapped up throughout the Arboretum, but that's high on my list. One of the spots that I think would be great is what we call the Nook, that little area walking up to the Rose Garden.
Yeah.
There's some areas on either side of that would be perfect from an exposure standpoint, the size of them, and also to put signs and for it to be a good educational opportunity. I've got my eye on a tons of places, not just in the garden, but out behind us where the horticulture field lab is. There's areas that we mow, just to mow it. So there's a bazillion places back there where we could do a true prairie or something like that. There's little strips in between the houses that get sprayed with herbicide every year. Those would be ideal for something more on the pocket prairies, and tie into the sustainable landscape management. So getting my legs underneath me here, and hopefully those things will kind of fall into place.
Cool. Okay, John wants to know, do you think it might be possible to evaluate the plant species in the prairie garden for their ability to attract pollinators?
I think a lot of that's been done. And we're looking at that stuff kind of informally, in between, our regular day jobs. But I think a lot of that work has been done. And those are usually the things that I gravitate towards. Because
like the mountain mints.
The mountain mints are...
Agastache.
Agastache is another good one. The other level that would be interesting to look at is, what are things that insects use to lay their eggs on. And, that's something that I've always been interested in. And that's something too that you talked on that briefly on. That's when you cut things back in the garden. That's something I'm always afraid of removing that layer of diversity. We tend to leave things up for a very long time here because we want to stretch that aesthetic value of that interest out. But that's also in the back of our minds is that. So that's something of interest to me if there's some research on that side of things.
Well, I know that the Anesia Agastache last year, our wildlife garden, which is a little bit slightly different, but it was flowering from sort of May through to the frost.
Forever.
And it was just looking so good.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some plants that are real workhorses and performers. Anithera.
Yeah, the Anithera. And then some of the Symphotrichums, the asters. I think the October skies.
It's late, but it's great.
It was
It's a good
it was
one.
blooming until mid-December, and there was still bees on it. It was crazy. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many variables and ways that you can look at it. You know, timing and the location is going to obviously make a big difference, and the amount of nectar, and I mean, there's so many different things that you could look at.
And the main thing that's hit me with this is it's not the plants. The plants are, like you said, they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. They just do their thing. They know the landscape, they know the soils, they know the weather, and they just do their thing. It's the weeds.
Yeah,
it's the weeds.
It's the unfortunate.
It's the ones that they'll also like the
other
weather.
side of the
The crabgrass and the Bermuda that gets in.
Yeah.
And some of the weeds are natives as well. We
Yeah.
have that Virginia,
the Virginia
buttonweed.
buttonweed.
Yeah, some of
Yeah.
it's native.
And someone made the suggestion instead of if you can't beat them, join them. Maybe consider using that as a ground cover because it's going to be there anyway. Thank you for that paradigm shift.
No
Potential. So
That's hilarious. I think we have time for one more question. Sandy wants to know, are there any areas where pocket prairies should not be installed? She says for HOA education, are there success stories or suggestions?
You said that bad word, HOA.
Right.
It's so hard to convince people that don't know much about plants what they should be doing with plants. And 9 times out of 10, that's who is dictating stuff in an HOA. They want a crisp green lawn. They want 2 loropetalums and a crepe myrtle.
Yeah, that's the one.
And it's hard to pitch that to them. We always joke when we're doing talks that we're preaching to each other about this message, and those are the people that we want to reach. But those are the people that may or may not be getting memberships and coming to classes and listening to these sorts of things. How do you reach those people? And throw the cherry on top, the land of misinformation that we live in, that just further complicates things. So I don't know what the answer is. I certainly think that this palette of plants and this style of planting can work in any situation, any yard, big or small. I would much rather have a front yard full of pocket prairie stuff than a tall fescue turfgrass lawn that I've got to mow once a year. And if I want it to be green and lush, I have to throw a lot of nitrogen on it and I have to water it once a week. I would much rather have that diversity of something interesting that's going to attract insects and also have different seasons of interest.
And I think too, one way, and I do know of people who are making inroads with their HOAs and really kind of educating, and I'm so glad that those folks are out there. And I think a big part of it is just kind of like making sure that you are selling it well. So making sure that you're picking plants that are going to be better behaved. They're going to stay small relatively. And then also maintaining them in, if they get a little bit unruly, it's amazing what containment will do. Like a tidy edge makes a huge difference. And I think even with the parking lot, that goes a long way. Like, again, looking at that linear view, having this sort of like flowing grass, but in this like nice, tidy, linear form makes a big difference. So, having a sign that says what that is also important too, so people can see like, oh, that's supposed to be there. Now I'm curious instead of like offended.
Start out small in some of those more confined areas where you can kind of get away with that sort of thing, and there has to be some form of education attached to it, because as soon as it turns brown, a lot of people are going to want to zip it down. Yeah. But there's still multiple seasons of it to kind of do its thing and provide interest.
Great. Well, that is all the time that we have for today.
That went by fast.
It really did. But thank you so much, Annabelle. Thank you so much, Megan, for coming out and having this conversation with us. Yes, thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, you did a wonderful job.
It was easy.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. We will be back again next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Greg and Mark will be sitting down going through our top 10 questions that we get here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. And they will answer those questions, and you'll be able to ask even more. So please join us for that. We will see you all then. Y'all take care.